Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gutenberg for Content Creators Intermediate WordPress Workshop. Thank you all for joining me today. My name is Brian DeConick. I work for OIT's Design and Web Services team. And joining me behind the scenes here is my colleague, Jen McFarland. Jen, do you want to say hi? Oh, I think Jen's muted, so Jen doesn't want to say hi. That's okay.
Hi, Jen.
There we go. So we'll be conducting the workshop today. Jen will mainly be hanging out in the Q&A document and answering questions. So if you have any questions, just beneath the video that you're watching right now, there's the description to the video, and that contains a link to the Q&A document. So if you hop in there, if you have any questions, if you just want to say hi, that's totally fine. And Jen will either answer questions in there or interrupt me and kick them out to me to say something on air in the broadcast. Just as a note for all of you, there is a delay between when I say something and it gets broadcast to you. And then there's obviously a delay between when Jen can read your question and pass it on to me. So if you have a question and you don't get a response right away, just be patient with us, and I promise we'll get to you. So, and then one more little disclaimer up front. YouTube Live works great for this. We really like doing these online workshops, but every now and then Google will have a little hiccup and something might go a little bit wrong. One time while I was presenting, I got kicked out of my own broadcast. So if anything like that happens, we just ask that you be patient and we'll get back going as quick as possible. So with all that said, welcome to Gutenberg for Content Creators. So if you're here, you're probably already a WordPress user, and maybe you've heard something about the new editor that's coming for WordPress called Gutenberg. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the what, why, and when of Gutenberg. What is happening and why are we having these changes? We're going to get to see the new editor and see some sort of pain points that we've identified through user testing, things that you might want to look out for when you start using the editor every day. We'll look at a little bit of what happens when your website gets upgraded to the new editor. We'll share some resources that you can go to for help. And then finally, we'll have some time today for you to actually be using the editor. I'm going to give you some examples of, try to create a page that looks like this sort of exercises. And then, of course, lots of time for you to ask questions or otherwise get help from us. So let's get started. The first question is, what's the big deal? The what, why, and when of Gutenberg. So if you've been using WordPress, you're probably familiar with this. This is the classic editor or the visual editor. For the last 12 years, this has been the main editor for WordPress. 12 years is a long time on the internet. 12 years is a lot of time for people to get set in their ways and used to a certain user interface. And the classic editor, this visual editor that we've been using, it's great, except sometimes. So what's great about it is it's really easy to use. If you are creating a simple web page with text and maybe a couple of images, it's really easy to get started. It's very similar to writing an email in Gmail or something like that. And it's dependable and reliable. One of the advantages of being a 12-year-old interface is that most of the bugs have been worked out by now. And then it's also, for a really simple web page, it's good for what you might hear called WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. So, you type in your text and you publish your page, and you're pretty confident that the thing that you just typed in is exactly what it's going to look like when you publish. When it's not great is when you start doing something a little more interesting. So more complex page layouts are really hard to do in the classic editor. It's a little bit outdated and clunky. It's 12 years old and it sort of looks it. It hasn't really kept growing with the rest of the web. And then we have this WYSIWYG which I was very proud of coming up with that string of letters. What you see is not necessarily what you get, depending on several different factors. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Here is an example of a good WYSIWYG experience. So you have on the left-hand side a page that has been created in the editor. It's an about page for a hypothetical departmental website. And then you publish it, and it basically looks like what you put in. The image is floated to the right, just like you asked it to be. You've got the bulleted list with the little NC State chevron instead of a bullet point, because this theme has been designed to have that, have that built into the editor. So on the whole, this is a pretty good experience. But this is a really simple web page. This is just text and some links and some bullet lists and an image. If you are looking to do something a little more interesting with like a multi-column layout or like a banner across the top, which you see a lot of on a lot of NC State websites, or something using icons or something like that, it's not exactly clear how to do that in the classic editor. There are a lot of NC State websites that have the links with the little arrow, the right hand pointing arrow that sort of scoots to the right when you hover over the link. There's not really a button in the classic editor that says add a little button that scoots to the right. So it's not really clear how you build a more complex page in this sort of classic editor. And so web developers at NC State and then elsewhere in the world too have been coming up with all sorts of ways to try to squeeze a little more power out of the classic editor, to give it a little more flexibility for doing complex things. And so here we just have a little collage of some of the things that might look familiar to you from your website. In the top left-hand corner, there is a screenshot of shortcodes, these little like square bracket pseudo HTML things that look like code, but they're not really code. In the middle, we have what's called Shortcake or Shortcode UI. You might know it if you have a website that's maintained by our group. You might see a button that says Insert Post Element. And what this is it creates a user interface, the little form for inserting a shortcode and previewing it in the editor. So it's the same shortcodes as the top left screenshot, but just sort of hidden from view and made to look a little prettier. In the top right, we have an example of what's called an advanced custom field module. Whether or not you know that that's what it's called doesn't really matter, but what you see when you're editing is something like this, where you're adding these content sections or these modules or these rows, depending on what it's been coded to say. And it has this very regimented, these are the fields you have to fill out, and then it will insert this item into the page, and you sort of build your page by stacking these rows. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, we have an example of a page building plugin. This is a free page building plugin that has its own sort of custom user interface and gives you more options for inserting things like widgets into the content of your page. But the thing is, none of these are WordPress. These are all things that have been added to WordPress, added to try to make it do more. And then none of these give you that WYSIWYG experience. What you see is what you get. None of the things that we're looking at right now look anything like what the final rendered web page is going to look like, or what we want it to look like. And so, we've all been putting all this time and energy into trying to build these tools that make this aging editor more powerful. But as we've been doing that, the rest of the web, the rest of the world has been moving on and has been coming up with newer and better ways of doing this. So here we have 3 screenshots from some other popular web publishing services, Medium, Wix, and Squarespace. And here you'll see some things that you'll start to see later on in this presentation too when we see the new editor. With Medium, it's a very clean user interface without a lot of text, but with lots of icons. With Wix, you have this little toolbar that pops up when text is highlighted, And so what you're seeing here is all of your options don't always have to be on the screen. They only have to be on the screen when it's time for you to use them. So if you didn't have text highlighted, that toolbar would disappear. And then in Squarespace, you have this tool that lets you insert something called content blocks. And that's something we're going to get to know very well today. So these are three examples of other web publishing services, and there are others out there too. They're doing some interesting things. We're not going to switch campus to any of those because WordPress, there's a lot going for WordPress at NC State. Not just the fact that we have lots of websites using WordPress, but also compared to these other services, we can just do more with WordPress. We can build more interesting things, more customized things. We can have it communicate with other APIs or other services on campus and do more useful things for what we're doing here. But that doesn't mean we don't have reason to learn from these sort of newcomer interfaces, these newer services like Wix and Squarespace and Medium. If you've never used them before, they're actually a lot of fun to use. They're in some ways they're a lot easier to use than WordPress. And so it's not just me that's saying this, it's people throughout the global WordPress community who are saying this. And so here's a quote from Matt Mullenweg. Matt is he's one of the co-founders of WordPress, and he's sort of the design lead and development lead. He doesn't write a whole lot of code anymore, I don't think, but he's the person who sets the tone for where the WordPress project is going. And last year in January, he announced what the new development focuses would be for WordPress. And one of those focuses was to create a new page and post building experience that makes writing rich posts effortless and has blocks to make it easy to do what today might take all these other things that I've been talking about, all these other sort of ways of making the classic editor do what we want it to do. And so blocks is a key word here. You're going to hear the word block over and over and over and over again today. Because that's the direction we're going with this new editor called Gutenberg. So Gutenberg will be the default editor in WordPress version 5.0. And WordPress 5.0 is going to be released, well, sometime this fall, we think. So there have been a lot of dates that have been passed around over the last year. At one point, we had a really good reason to think something would be coming in April of this year, but it ended up being pushed back. The WordPress community is trying to do this right. And so Gutenberg won't be the default WordPress editor in version 5.0 until it's really ready for prime time. That doesn't mean it won't be a little bumpy, but there are a lot of really talented and smart people putting a lot of time into trying to make this the best editor that they can. So when WordPress 5.0 is released, it will not be an instant upgrade to Gutenberg for most websites on campus. We have another workshop that we offer, Gutenberg for site administrators. So if you are a site administrator and you're thinking about supporting other users or what your process is for upgrading and whether or not you can delay upgrading or things like that, I would recommend signing up for that workshop as well. We're going to be posting more dates relatively soon once our training coordinator finishes scheduling them for the fall. The good news is there are ways that we can upgrade to WordPress 5.0 without immediately flipping the switch on Gutenberg. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't start thinking about Gutenberg, start getting familiar with it, and start learning about sort of the future of WordPress content editing. So your takeaway right now is if you are a site administrator in addition to a content editor, or if you know your site administrator in your office, now's a great time for you to look on Reporter and keep an eye on it for the next WordPress or Gutenberg for Site Administrators workshop. So I do want to have one quick disclaimer here. Gutenberg is an evolving tool. So there are screenshots, and eventually we'll be using a live Gutenberg interface so that you can get to know the editor. That what you see today is not necessarily what you will see when your website upgrades to Gutenberg. There may be some variation, there may be some minor changes, but we don't expect anything really significant to change. For the most part, it's all going to be basically what you see today. So I built it up. Let's see this new thing. I'm going to build it up a little bit more. I forgot about these slides. So, so the good news is that most of WordPress is not changing. This is something that we get asked about a lot from people who are hearing about this new editor and maybe feeling a little bit of panic. The vast majority of the WordPress that you already know is not going to change. And so we're talking about things like adding media, managing comments, or changing themes and plugins if that's something you can do, managing users if you have the power to do that, things under the tools and settings menus for administrators. None of that is changing. What is changing is creating and editing posts, pages, and then any other content types that you might also have. So some of your websites might have a people content type for a people directory. You might have a publications content type or an events content type, things like that. You may also have an issue with websites that have themes or plugins that change the content editing experience in some way. And we'll talk a lot about that toward the end of the presentation. But this is Gutenberg. This is what the new editor looks like. It should look a little bit reminiscent of those other tools that I showed you earlier. Again, it's a very clean interface with a lot of iconography. It's lots of white space. It's sort of a blank canvas for you to create your content on. There are a few things about Gutenberg that are very intuitive, and a few things that are maybe a little bit more of a conceptual leap that you'll have to get used to when moving into the new editor. So let's take a look. The first thing, and this is a relatively new feature that we're really excited about, when your website upgrades to the new editor, the first time you use Gutenberg, you'll see these little tips that pop up. So for instance, this is a tip next to, so I'm presenting this from home, and you may have just heard my cat meow as he walked in. Sorry about that. Here the tip is highlighting the block inserter tool, this little plus button, and you'll know what is being highlighted with the tip by this little blue-green dot that shows up next to it. Tips are something that you can dismiss if you feel like you've got it and you don't need to see it. They're also something that you can bring back, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit if you feel like you need another little reminder. So I used the word block a lot earlier. In Gutenberg, everything is a block. So as you're typing paragraphs, you're hitting the enter key and going to the next line and creating a new paragraph. Each time you create a new paragraph, the paragraph that's created is created as a block. What that means is either nothing at all or quite a lot, depending on what you're doing with your content. If you're just having text and you just want it the way you type it out, you don't need to worry about blocks at all. It's just text on a page. If you want to do something interesting or different with your content, if you want to rearrange things, if you want to format it differently, that's where having blocks becomes a really powerful tool. So here in the screenshot, we have a bulleted list or an unordered list with bullet points. And you see that this is a block, and you can tell it's a block because it has this little gray outline around it. It has a toolbar attached to the top that give you the formatting options that make sense for a bulleted list. And then over to the right-hand side, you have this little 3-dot menu. Just this past weekend, I heard somebody refer to it as a kebab menu. And then a little trash can if you want to remove the block entirely. Not pictured in this is also a control for moving a block up and down or grabbing and dragging and dropping it. So everything you create in Gutenberg in this editor will be a block. Even if you're just typing text, it becomes a block right before your very eyes. So as I said, anything you want to add is added as a block, and that means lots of things that you might want to add. Things like paragraphs or bulleted lists, but also images and headings, anything dynamic like audio or video, um, things like buttons, or you can have multi-column layouts, columns of text or columns of other things. All of these things are blocks in this new Gutenberg world. This little plus button that we already saw is referred to as the block inserter. Nobody's actually going to call it that. If you just call it the plus button, we'll know what you're talking about. And this opens up this tool that lets you choose the block that you want to add, and will insert it into the page where your cursor was, or at the bottom of the page if your cursor isn't somewhere in the text. You have a lot. This is how you'll get to all of the blocks that we just saw, and more blocks than just those two. I do want to point out up at the very top of the block inserter tool is a search bar. So if you know what your block is called, but you don't want to go scrolling through looking at all the dozens of blocks that are available, you can just start typing button, for instance, and it will filter that down and just give you the button block. So this little plus button appears in different places in the editor depending on what you're doing and when you're doing it. So again, this gets back to this idea that the controls that are available to you should be available depending on the context of what you're doing. Each time this button appears, it will give you the same options that you have anywhere else in the editor. So there's always this plus button up in the top left-hand corner of the editor, but if it shows up somewhere else, it will open up the same inserter tool. Blocks can be nested inside of other blocks, so long as the other block supports nesting. And so this is a relatively new feature that has a lot of potential, but it's still a little rough around the edges. So here I have a screenshot showing an example of nested blocks. So you can't see this because it's not in focus, it's not highlighted, but around the entire content that's displayed here, you would have a columns block, which itself has sub blocks, which are 2 columns. Those are automatically inserted for you when you add the columns block. And then you can put your paragraph block or your image block or your YouTube embed block or anything like that into those subcolumns. This has a lot of potential for making some really interesting page layouts. It's also something that takes a little time to get the hang of. So if you don't want to worry about multi-column layouts, that's totally fine too. There's no reason that you would have to make your content any more complicated than you want it to be. So each block can be customized individually, and your starting point for that, so you have a couple of things. First, you have the toolbar that goes across the top of the block if there are formatting options that make sense. So here we have paragraph block, and you have text alignment options. You have the option to make text bold or italicized. You can add a link, things like that. And then off to the right-hand side, you have this little kebab menu, these 3 dots. And when you click that and open it, you have this drop down with more options. And the options that you see here will really depend on what the block is and what options are built into that block. If you click on Show Block Settings, oh, okay, I see. So here's just another example. All blocks have options in their block menu. And if you click on the Show Block Settings right there at the top, and this here is an older screenshot that says Show Advanced Settings, that will open up this view where you have options related to the block over in the right-hand sidebar. So this is sort of a new thing in WordPress. The right-hand sidebar in the editor has always been where you go to click Publish, or where you go to, I see a typo on the slide. Sorry about that. Block with just a C. Sorry, I got distracted. So the right-hand sidebar is where you go traditionally to add a category to a post or choose a page parent or something like that. Now, when you have these block settings, you have more formatting options that are available. You can change the text size, you can change the background color, things like that for a paragraph block, and every block has slightly different options available to it. So here, just to highlight that, we have an image block. So this would be if you want to add an image to your page. The options that you see in the dropdown are a little bit different than what you saw for the paragraph. And then over in the right-hand sidebar, you have a lot fewer options. So you don't have all these options for changing text color or something like that, because that just doesn't really make sense for an image. So here's another example. This is to have like a little read more separator for a blog post. And again, there are a lot of options that don't really make sense to have for a read more separator, so they aren't available for this block. In the block inserter, blocks are organized into different sections. Out of the box, you're going to see most used, common blocks, formatting, layout elements, widgets, embeds, and shared. And actually, shared will only appear if you have a shared block, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So this is a lot to choose from. But again, there's the search tool at the top of the block inserter that helps you find what you're looking for. The embed blocks are similar to what's already supported in WordPress. So in WordPress right now, if you take, for instance, a YouTube URL and paste it into the classic editor, WordPress will process that URL and turn it into a YouTube embed. Now you also have this block, this YouTube block or this Twitter block or things like that, that will give you instructions on how to add your YouTube video or something like that to a page by pasting in the URL. This is, I think, an improvement for WordPress, because some of these features in the past, like just pasting in a YouTube URL and that automatically embedding, that's the sort of thing that you just sort of had to know about or have somebody tell you about. It wasn't immediately obvious. Now, if you're a total newcomer and you see this YouTube embed, that triggers something in your head that says, oh yes, I can embed a YouTube video and this is how. That being said, there's some complicating factors to this that we'll talk about when we talk about our user testing. I mentioned earlier the shared blocks, the shared section. So the shared section is empty when you start up a new Gutenberg-ified website, but you can add shared blocks. So here I have a block that I'm going to my drop-down menu and clicking on Convert to Shared Block. That will make this paragraph that I have selected, or any block that I want to use, that will make it something that can be added and reused as is on any post or any page in your website. And you'll see that here when you go into the shared section and you hover over a paragraph or any other block that you have saved here, it'll open up this little preview off to the side. And this is exactly the text that was in the paragraph originally. And now I can add exactly the snippet of text anywhere I want to. I think there's a lot of potential to this for doing things like if you have specific language that you want to make sure is replicated on every page of your website, or you have a little sort of footer at the end of every blog post or something like that. This is a good way of making sure that the language is consistent every time. It looks the same every time. I think there's a lot of potential for this. So all of those other categories besides shared and embeds, that's where most of the magic happens when editing with Gutenberg. So most used is going to change based on what you use in your daily editing experience. But then common blocks, formatting, layout elements, and widgets are all the different things that you can add to your page. Excuse me. I'm going to take a sip of water. So some of the blocks that we want to highlight, my colleague Jen labeled these as everyday blocks. So these are the blocks that you're going to use over and over and over again for most of your web content. So a heading, paragraph, bulleted lists or numbered lists, and images. That covers a lot of the content that we put into our websites. I hear Jen coming online.
Yeah, Brian, if you could, we have one question.
Okay.
If you edit a shared block on one page, will it update everywhere else that it's shared? And I'm going to go ahead and answer that and say that yes, it is. If you want to update it on just a single page, you have to disconnect it from that shared block and edit it just on that page, because otherwise, if you make a change to it on that page, it will update it everywhere. And I just wanted to say that out loud because I felt like other people might have the same question. So, okay,
Yep.
continue.
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. So these are your everyday blocks that will cover a lot of what you do on your website. Then there are some other blocks that are worth mentioning. So the classic block is sort of the WordPress classic editor all bundled up in a block form. So if there's something that you know how to do in sort of old WordPress, but you can't figure out how to do in Gutenberg, first I would suggest you try to figure it out, try to experiment with other blocks. But if you're in a time crunch and you really just need to get it up on the website, you can open up that classic block and do it in the classic editor. And it will be right there for you. And we'll see the classic block again in a little bit when we talk about upgrading. The shortcode block, so if your website uses shortcodes, they will be transformed into a shortcode block. Buttons are super handy. Everybody likes a good button that they can click on. Cover images are sort of banner images that you can put text overlays on. Latest posts and sort of similar things to that are going to insert a list of an automatically updating dynamic list of whatever your latest blog posts are. Columns we spoke about a little bit earlier. These are for multi-column layouts, and you can put other blocks inside of a column block. And then galleries. So there's been this functionality for some time in WordPress for creating photo galleries. With Gutenberg, they have made it a lot better and a lot easier to get to. So if you have many images and you want to display them in a very pleasing way, this is going to make things a lot easier. And then Jen also labeled this slide blocks worth forgetting. So some of these blocks are less useful. The subhead block is for sort of beneath a heading, sort of a subheading. It's not that useful of a block in terms of what we've been seeing in our experimenting with Gutenberg. It's not really marked up as something that will be exposed to screen readers particularly well or things like that. So it doesn't do a lot to provide much structure to your page the way headings do. The video block. So the video block will display a video or embed a video that is saved in your media library. And if you paste a YouTube video or a YouTube link into the video block, it will not work. This is something that confused us at first and has confused other users that we've worked with. So since if your website is hosted by OIT, we generally suggest you not host video in your WordPress media library because it's very resource intensive. Instead, host it in a service like YouTube or Vimeo. And so you can probably get away with just ignoring the video block entirely. You have blocks quote and pull quote, and they do slightly different things, but there's not a lot about them to tell what the difference is. They even have the same icon. Code is for if you're displaying code for people to read on your web page. So if I'm writing a coding tutorial, I would use that. But for the most part, most people on campus aren't going to be using that block. And then the verse block, it took us a little while to figure out what this was about. WordPress is used by a lot of poetry bloggers or people who are just posting their poems online. And when you are formatting your poem, having white space, control over your white space is very helpful. So when you're writing a paragraph, if you hit enter, that will start a new paragraph block. when you're using a verse block and you hit enter, it will respect that and keep you within the same block. So if you hit enter 16 times, you'll have 16 blank lines before the next thing. Generally, you probably don't need to worry about that for most university websites. So all of this is a little different, and there are some sort of tips and tricks that we can help you when you're coming in new to the editor and you're not sure what you should be looking out for. So all of this, all right, so here I say it's very different from what most of us are used to. It makes certain things a lot easier, but it's a big conceptual step. So earlier this year, in late January, we conducted user testing with a group of power users who already knew WordPress really well, for the most part. There were a couple of newcomers in there too. And we had them do these 30-minute content exercises where we would give them a page and they would recreate it in the new editor, and we'd see what worked and what didn't, where they got caught up, where they found things easy. If you really want to learn more about this, I wrote a long, probably longer than it needed to be, blog post all about this. It's at that Go link, that URL. But I'm about to give you the highlights, so don't go read that right this second. I should also mention, and I should have mentioned this at the top, we will be sharing these slides out to everybody after the presentation, and this video will be online afterwards too. So if there are any links in here that you'd like to follow, you don't have to quickly scribble them down or anything like that. So the first thing that we noticed in our user testing is that no one knows what to call anything or where anything is. And so the little kebab button, this 3-dot menu that I talked about before, this is a really good example of that. One of our users was trying to describe what he was doing with it, and he just could not come up with the right words. And so he called it the mini hamburger options. I don't know that I would call that a mini hamburger, but I sort of see where he's coming from. And so this is something that we're aware of as IT support staff, and something you should be aware of as a content creator is that sometimes it's not going to be immediately obvious what you call something and how you articulate that if you have a question. That's okay, and we'll muddle through it together until we all sort of develop a shared vocabulary. It's not always clear when to choose which block, and so just as a reminder, the video block and the YouTube block that I mentioned earlier, they do different things, but it makes a lot of sense to click on video if you want to add a YouTube video. It's just not the right answer with the way the editor has been coded. The block settings in the right-hand sidebar that I mentioned earlier, a lot of people didn't notice that. That was something that they just aren't used to looking for in the right-hand sidebar, and we had to remind people a couple of times, like, you're trying to change the font size. The way you do that is to go over to the right-hand sidebar. And then in general, it took people a little while to get used to the idea that some options would be there and some options wouldn't be there depending on what you're doing. It's just sort of a new style of WordPress. Sometimes it's not clear when you want to get a new type of block or when you can just customize the block that you have. So here we have both of these are paragraph blocks, but they look very different because the paragraph block has a lot of customization options available to it. If somebody told you to create a block with a gray background color and red text and a big first letter, you might think that that's not a paragraph block, and you might go hunting for something different. But the block options for the paragraph block give you these options. And so this is just another one of those things where we all need to build up some new intuition about what my options are and where I should look for them. This is a really subtle thing. We had people who had a little bit of confusion about whether they had to highlight the text that they were going to do something to when they were using the block settings in the right-hand sidebar. When you're using the little toolbar at the top of a block, it works just like what you're used to in the classic editor or in Gmail or an interface like that. you highlight the text that you want to change, and then you click to make it bold or italicized or something like that. When you are using the block settings in the right-hand side, those changes, those formatting changes will apply to the entire block. So if you want to change the font size, you don't have to select the text that you need. You just have to go over to the font size tool and move the slider or put in a number. And so the two key takeaways for diving into Gutenberg and using the new editor are these two reminders. Don't forget to look at the advanced settings on the right, and sometimes try a different block. WordPress is very forgiving and is still very forgiving, just like it always has been. It keeps a running revision history, so anything that you do can be rolled back if you realize that was a huge mistake. And so, it's important to practice a little bit, and we'll show you some resources to practice pretty soon. But don't be afraid to just experiment a little, and don't be afraid to mess up a little bit. Try those different blocks and see what they do, things like that. So this is all sort of theoretical, your sort of ideal plane of a WordPress website. But we all actually have websites that we're using right now. And at some point, they're going to go from the old editor to the new editor. So what's actually going to happen? Right now, there's a way to get Gutenberg early, which is a plugin called the Gutenberg plugin. And what this gives you is the option to edit content either using Gutenberg or using the classic editor. After WordPress 5.0 is released, in default WordPress, the option of using the classic editor will go away. But if you want to get it back, there's a classic editor plugin that can be re-enabled to give you the classic editor back. This is a conversation to have with your site administrator about whether you need to use the classic editor plugin for a little while to have a nice transition into Gutenberg, or whether you'll be ready right away, things like that. So the content that you already have in your posts and pages, out of the box, Gutenberg is going to take and put into the classic editor block. So I'll remind you, the classic editor block is a block in the new Gutenberg editor that has all the tools that are available in the old classic editor, just now packaged up into a block. All of your content is put into a single editable region. So instead of your paragraphs and your lists and things like that being separated into blocks, it's all put into a single block. And if you don't need to change anything, or if you just want to make a few minor updates, you can just leave it like this for as long as you want. So far as we know, the classic editor block is not going to go away. And if you have thousands and thousands of blog posts, you don't have to worry about going back and updating them. You can just leave them the way they are. If you have thousands and thousands of pages, you can focus on updating them to Gutenberg a little at a time as you make changes, as your staff directory changes or something like that. There's not an immediate rush, and switching to Gutenberg, going to this new editor, isn't going to break anything for your end users who are visiting the website from the public view. Everything should basically work for them the way it always has. This is really just a change that's impacting people like you, people who are editing content on the website. So when you are ready to break it out of the classic block and start using all of the tools that Gutenberg has available to you, all of these block transformations and extra settings and things like that, you can click on the little 3-dot menu next to the classic block, and you'll have this new option here that says Convert to Blocks. And if you click on Convert to Blocks, that will Gutenberg will, as intelligently as it can, break all of the content in the classic block into the blocks that match what it should be. So here we see what that looks like. On the left-hand side, everything is in the classic block. And on the right-hand side, everything is broken up into different blocks. So you see that the first paragraph is now a paragraph block, and I have that paragraph block highlighted. So you see the gray box around the edge of the paragraph block to lead off with the toolbar across the top. And then over in the left-hand side where it had that special embed, that My Media Site embed from the My Media Site service that Delta runs, that was done using custom code. And so Gutenberg didn't have a block to match that up to. And so it converted that into a custom HTML block. So it's not quite as pretty, but you don't lose anything. You can still edit that HTML and make updates if you need to, or you can just leave it alone. So long as it's the way it is, it'll continue to work for your end users. But now that it's been broken up into these blocks, now you can do all of the cool things that Gutenberg gives you the power to do. You have the drag and drop interface that you can move paragraphs around or other content around. You have all of the block options. You can change things into a multi-column layout, things like that. If the editor doesn't recognize something, it will give you a message that looks like this. And it will give you a couple of possible fixes. It will offer to overwrite it, which means that Gutenberg will do its best to match it to the nearest thing it can figure out. It will offer to convert it to classic. So that's take what you have and put it into a classic block, just like what you had before. And it will give you the option of editing it as HTML. So, it says, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to give you the raw code that you want to make changes to. We've actually not seen this image very often. When we mostly see this image is when we as developers have done something that's broken something, and Gutenberg says, whoa, what did you do here? You did something you weren't supposed to do. For most sort of everyday regular WordPress content, your regular text and images, things like that, you don't run into this. It does a really good job of transitioning it into the new editor and into blocks. So earlier on, I talked about all those different ways we've been trying to get more out of the classic editor. And from all of those different ways, we've identified sort of 4 situations that campus should be aware of and that we're aware of as we develop our training. The first is the easiest situation, sort of vanilla WordPress, and that's basically what I just walked through. You have text, you have images, and you can just click on convert to blocks and it will break it up and you're good to go. That's for a situation where you don't have a lot of extra stuff going on. You don't have a lot of extra plugins that change how the editor works. The next level up would be sites that use lots of shortcodes or lots of shortcake powered shortcodes. So again, shortcake is that shortcode preview tool that I mentioned earlier. A lot of websites that are built by our team and OIT use this tool. Then you have sites that are built using advanced custom fields. So those are the pages that have those special modules that you keep adding modules and they stack on top of each other to build your template. University Communications uses this tool a lot, as do a lot of outside vendors, and OIT has used it a number of times as well. And then you have sites that use page building plugins. So you may recognize names like Visual Composer or Divi or Beaver Builder, things like that. So very briefly, we'll walk through each of these. Vanilla WordPress, we kind of already walked through, and basically it should be a pretty smooth upgrade. You don't need to change your content right away, but when you do, it should happen pretty easily. You might run into some issues with some old plugins breaking, but that's something that you'll want to talk to your site administrator about. If you have a shortcake-powered shortcode in a page, in the classic editor, it might look something like this. You have this nice preview in the editor of what it looks like. When you upgrade to Gutenberg, you'll keep that preview in the classic block. Some of the styling might get a little bit messed up, but for the most part, it looks like what you had before. But then when you click on the Convert to Blocks button, it will break it into shortcode blocks. So you lose your in-editor preview you see the underlying short code that was always there behind the scenes. But otherwise, nothing changes. In this form as a shortcode block, everything will still continue to work for the folks who are visiting your website on the public side of your website. Converting from these shortcodes to native Gutenberg blocks would be the next step. And we don't have any screenshots for that because we haven't 100% figured out what the best way to do that is yet. Jen and I were actually just at a conference over the weekend where we met somebody who has come up with a conversion technique that has a lot of potential, and we're looking forward to testing out really soon. So then you have these advanced custom fields websites. So again, it might look something like this, where you're adding a module or a row or something like that for your page content. In sort of the most extreme version of this, excuse me. In sort of the most extreme version of this, you don't have the classic editor at all. You just have form fields that you fill out for these sections, and you're just adding them. So the visual editor, the classic editor is removed entirely. And the good news is, again, when you upgrade to Gutenberg, nothing will break. Everything will still work. So all of those field groups that you had before are still there in the bottom section underneath the editor. The downside is that all of those blocks that you can add at the top, that plus button at the top, you can add them as much as you want, but there's a really good chance that they just won't appear. They won't work with your theme, especially if your theme is coded in such a way that the visual editor has been removed entirely. Again, this is not a nightmare scenario. This is, you still have a way of creating and editing content. You still have a way of of making the changes you need to make to your website, and your end users won't know the difference. It's just inconvenient because you have all these new tools that are to oh, can people hear me? Jen, can you let me know if people can hear me? Or if you can hear me? I think I had a little bit of an internet blip. Okay, Jen says she can hear me now. I'm going to trust that everybody else can too. So yeah, YouTube Live, always an adventure. So it looks like I lost my internet for just a moment. So as I was saying, this isn't a nightmare scenario. You can still update your content if you need to, but you just don't have the ability to use these new tools. So this is a good conversation to have with your site administrator or with whoever the developers are that work with your site administrator to maintain your website, whether they're on campus in OIT or UCOM, or whether they're an off-campus vendor or somebody like that, just to figure out what your next steps are so that you can take full advantage of all these new tools that are coming to WordPress. There we go. So there we go. So the key takeaways for an advanced custom fields powered site: the front end won't break, but the editor is a little bit more confusing until it gets upgraded, until some changes to your theme. And some themes may need some pretty significant rewrites. And just how significant those rewrites are really going to depend on a site-by-site basis on how advanced custom fields are being used. So then the last scenario that we've mapped out is the page builder scenario, and we've only sort of mapped it out. We don't really know what's going to happen. You're going to flip the switch to Gutenberg, and we'll just see what happens. And the reason we don't know what's going to happen is because there are a lot of different page building plugins or themes or things out there. I mentioned earlier Divi, Visual Composer, and Beaver Builder. those are three that are very well supported. They have pretty successful companies behind them. And so we think that we think they're going to do a really good job of upgrading and being Gutenberg compatible. There are others out there that maybe are less well supported, that somebody built 5 years ago and then stopped updating. So the key thing for you right now, if you use a page building thing like this, and again, you can talk to your site administrator if you're not sure, is to find out what the page builder company's plan is for Gutenberg. If they don't have a plan, maybe start looking for other options. If they do have a plan, make sure that you have an up-to-date license and make sure that you're updating to the latest version of their plugin before WordPress 5.0 is released. So right now I'm going to give you all homework. You should go and figure out which of these scenarios seems to match your website, which of these looks most familiar, and contact whatever support team you need to contact. If you are not sure, if you have no idea, you can always drop in on our office hours every Friday morning. And this URL right here, design.oit.ncsu.edu/office hours, will give you some information about where you can find us and help you get started with that. So this is all a lot of information, and I'm talking at you a lot. I want you to know that there's more than just me in this video to help you through it. There's a lot of information that's been gathered by the developers who are working on the new editor and shared in the Gutenberg handbook at wordpress.org. The Gutenberg plugin is available for you to test and try out anywhere you'd like to try it out, anywhere you'd like to install it. And that's something you can talk to your site administrator about, is getting a chance to see it, and we'll see it in just a couple of minutes with a test environment. We have been compiling resources at go.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg, and on our website, design.oit.ncsu.edu, we have more information and are going to continue to post more information about our plans for folks that get support from us for their websites. So I've talked for about an hour, and I am tired of talking, so I'm going to make you all try out the new editor. We have two links for you to copy down at some point: the public sandbox link and the campus test environment link. So the campus test environment you can just save for later. You don't need right now. It requires you to log in with your Unity ID and password, but you can create a new website. You can build as many pages and posts as you want. You can do anything you want. It's all hidden from the world. You need a password to get in, and so that's a place where you can get to know the new editor and break things as much as you want. For right now, I'm going to have you all go to this other URL, oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg/quick. So go ahead and open that up in another browser tab. And so this will take you to a sort of a demo page. It shows you the Gutenberg editor. It's a live editor that you can interact with, but none of the changes that you make are going to be saved. We've preloaded some content into it so you can kick the tires a little bit and see how it works without having to come up with your own text or your own images to add. And I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and get a little water. I'll be back in 5 minutes. In the meantime, you should get to know the new editor, try things out, and then I have a few things I want to show you after that. So have fun, and I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. All right, so it's been about 5 minutes. Hopefully you've had a chance to get to know the new editor a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and open up the Gutenberg quick page as well. And let's see. Okay, so this should be what you've been looking at. There's a little preamble by us, and then down here we have the first chapter, couple of chapters of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which is the most downloaded book from the other Project Gutenberg, the public domain book repository. So you'll notice a couple of things right off the bat. First is that it is a very clean and readable interface. If you're not interacting with blocks, you don't see a lot to distract you. It's just the text and the images that you'd like to use. I'm going to go ahead and click on a block. So hovering over this block, you see it's labeled the type of block it is. You'll see also that if I'm in the right place, I'll have this little inserter that is the same block inserter as what you see up here. So I click that plus and it opens up this new line that will let me select the block that I want to use. Again, you'll also see that certain tools only appear in context. So this toolbar right here only appears when a paragraph block is highlighted. You do have a customization option. If you go up to the top three-dot menu over in the top right-hand corner and go to Settings and Fix Toolbar to Top, that will move your options for that block up here. And then anytime that you edit a block, it will give you the appropriate options up here. And there seems to be a little bit of a bug, so I'm going to undo that. There we go. So I have my options for my paragraph block right here. Over on the right-hand side, I have the advanced options that are related to the paragraph block. So I can change my text size, or I can give it a drop cap, this big first letter, or I can do things like add a background color or a text color. There are a few things with this that I want to highlight that I think are really cool and I'm really excited about. So if I choose a light gray background color that goes against the black text in a very readable way, it will do that for me and it won't tell me anything is wrong. But let's say I choose a background color that is hard to read against the text color. It will pop up with this little message at the bottom here that tells me the color combination may be hard for people to read. This message pops up whenever there's a violation of the, you may have heard the WCAG 2.0 accessibility standards. These are the standards that we follow at NC State. And in terms of color contrast between the text and the background, Gutenberg will tell you if you have an inaccessible combination. It will not tell you if you have made a poor choice, like using UNC Blue right here. That's something that hopefully everybody at NC State knows better than to do. But also, there are ways for developers to make sure that the only colors that are available here are the NC State brand colors. So by default, you have these colors like this pretty light green and this pink color and things like that. But certain themes and certain plugins on campus are slowly being updated so that when you switch to Gutenberg, the only options you'll have here are the NC State colors. I will go ahead and clear this out. As we work our way down the page, so I'll start with this image right here. You'll notice it has some alignment options. So some of these are very familiar. If you add a new image, it will start as center aligned, which will be sort of a full width image right in the middle of your content column. I can left align it and resize it. Here we go. left align and resize so that the text of the page flows around it. And here I'll go ahead and right align it. But now you also have these two new alignment options for wide width and full width. And if I go wide width, you'll see it breaks out to be a little bit wider than the main column of text. It's sort of expanding beyond that containing element. And then if I go to full width, it will go all the way to the edge of the page. If I were to be able, like if I was able to publish this and view the page that has this image on it, you would see that this would go all the way to the edge of whatever the sort of web page boundary is that's defined in the theme that you're using, whether that's all the way to the edge of the browser or just all the way to the widest that anything can be in that theme. I'm going to pop it back down to this. I'll also point out when you are editing or when you're messing with the formatting for an image, you have this little pencil icon here to edit the image, and this gives you the media library that you're familiar with if you want to switch it out for something else. Let's see. So here we have a couple of heading blocks. So here's the heading that's an H2 heading. Here's a subheading, which was the block that I told you about earlier that we haven't really found any good uses for, except right here. And then here's another heading block, which is an H3 heading. If you are familiar with headings and accessibility already, then all of this should be very familiar to you. If you're not, then here's a little crash course in accessibility. So if you are a user who uses some sort of assistive technology like screen reading software, because you're not able to visually perceive the page, then the screen reading software will use your heading levels to tell you information about the structure of the page. So it'll tell you the sections of the page and give you the option of skipping to the section that you're looking for. And it's just like the way a sighted user would scan a page looking for big text to, say like, oh, this is the section I'm looking for. The difference is that it's not just looking for big text, it's looking for text that is specifically coded to share certain structural information. So from an accessibility standpoint, and as a university, we care about this, it's really important that you use your heading levels properly. And key to that is not skipping heading levels in a way that doesn't make sense, that would be disorienting to users. And Gutenberg has a tool that's built in under this little I information button up here. It says content structure when you hover over it in the top left-hand corner. If I click on that, this will give me the document outline. This is handy for a couple of things. First, it can jump you to where you want to be in the page as you're editing. So if I want to go back up to the top, it will just pop me back up to the top. If I want to skip to chapter 2, I can click that and it will skip me down there. But the other thing that's handy about it is if you do something wrong with your heading structure, it will give you a little alert to tell you this isn't quite right. So if I make this a heading 4 or even a heading 5, that is not the appropriate heading level. It's skipping too many levels from an H2 to an H5. And so now when I go up to my info button, it will tell me I have my title, an H2, then it skips down to an H5, and that this is the incorrect heading level. So I will go ahead and make it right again, because I don't want our accessibility coordinator to see that I did that and yell at me. I like Crystal a lot. She's really great and doesn't yell. If she's watching this, then hi, Crystal. So this is a really handy tool for checking that you're doing things in an accessible way, and also just seeing at a glance how a long piece of content, how a long web page is structured. It also gives some other information like word count and the number of blocks and the number of paragraphs you're using and things like that. I mentioned earlier that WordPress still has a full revision history. You see that if you switch in the right-hand sidebar from the block tab to the document tab. You'll see the revisions button here, and if you click that, that will let you go back to a previous version of the page. And then other tools that are available, like categories and tags and things like that for posts, would be in this space here as well. I want to show you a couple of the blocks that we particularly like. So I'll go ahead and add a cover image block right here and select in the media library an image. Let's choose this image of Tally Student Union. Select. And you'll see, just like the regular image block, you have these options for alignment. I want my Tally image to be full width. And now I will, excuse me, now I will click on the block and I have the option of adding text in a text overlay. Tally. This is really handy for these interesting visual effects on a page or in a post to break things up with something that's visually very noticeable. You can change how the text appears with your text alignment. So if I want it left aligned or right aligned, I can make the word Tally bold or italicized. And then also I can link as well. So if I want the word Tally to link to the Tally Student Union website, I could do that as well. Since you are putting text against an image, you do still have to worry about color contrast. And so you can choose the background dimness that makes it readable. So here it is with 0 dimness, and that white text against a white cloud is going to be hard for a lot of users. Similarly, or conversely rather, this is very readable, but not really the point of having a background image. So somewhere in the middle will usually be good. And I would say it starts at 50%. That's usually pretty good. You may need to experiment a little bit, or otherwise contact the accessibility office if you're wondering if there's sufficient contrast or if you're looking for other guidance. I mentioned earlier the photo gallery block, the gallery block. That's also a favorite block of mine. And there's an example of it further down, but I'll go ahead and create a new one. I click gallery and I select from the media library a few pictures and create new gallery. Here I can drag and drop to reorder them. I'll go ahead and insert. And Gutenberg has arranged them like this by default in this nice grid layout. If I change over here in the right-hand side, if I change the number of columns for each, or for the gallery, it will rearrange the images as needed. So if I want a gallery that's just a single column of images, we'll make them all full width, center aligned. If I want my gallery to be up to 4 across, 4 columns, it will do that as well. You can add as many images as you'd like to a gallery, and it will arrange them in the way that it sees best. It actually handles differently sized images pretty well too. So I picked a couple of images that were of very similar dimension, but it will crop them sort of as intelligently as it can to try to make them fit together nicely. And you see you have the caption that comes with the images right here. You can just select that and remove it if you don't need the caption. And then I'm going to show off one more block before I walk you through a couple of content exercises. I'm going to show you the column block. So we have columns right here. And again, we have the search toolbar up here. So if I start to type COL, that will give me, that will filter down by that. So you have a couple of different options here. I want columns beta, which gives me the most flexibility. Eventually that beta tag is going to go away once they work out a few more bugs. And here you see I have two columns, 1 and 2 right here. If I move to sort of hover over the whole thing, you'll see the outline goes around both columns. These give me the options for the entire columns block, and I can go over here to the right-hand side and add additional columns here. So I'm going to leave it at 3, and you can click into a column and start typing just like anywhere else. It will create a paragraph block. You can also click into a column and use the block inserter to add any other block type that you'd like. So I'll go ahead and add an image. And this time let's use the Reynolds Coliseum scoreboard. And so here we have a nice multi-column layout highlighting whatever content that you'd like in these columns. So I'll go ahead and add my latest posts. So hopefully you've had a chance to experiment a little bit with the editor, try changing text. If you go over here, you see these little up and down arrows to reorder the content. And then if you hover over and you see your cursor change to the little like hand icon or something like that, that indicates that you can grab on and drag and drop. The drag and drop is relatively new and is sometimes a little quirky, I guess I would say. But for the most part, it works just fine for me. I'm able to move my paragraphs or any other block exactly where I want it to go. And it will still intelligently wrap around images that are left aligned, just as you'd expect it to. So as I was saying, hopefully you've had a chance to experiment with some of this content. I'm going to give you some exercises now. I go back to my slides. So let's start by seeing if you can recreate something that looks like this. So I'm just going to give you a moment to take a look at this and go into the editor. Go ahead and use the text that's already in the page, one of the images, and move things around so that you have something that looks like this.
Brian, we have a question about how responsive the column functionality is. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the answer is it's getting better. When the column block was first introduced a couple of months ago, it was not responsive at all. And your developers who are working on the theme may need to do a little bit of tweaking to make sure that it is nice and responsive for mobile devices, that it stacks and collapses the way you want it to. Some of that may end up being done for us when Gutenberg finally launches in WordPress 5.0, but it's not a lot of code for a developer to make columns work better on mobile devices. That being said, if you were to install Gutenberg right now and go into any old theme and just put everything in like 6 cross columns, that's not going to look great on a mobile device right away. There is just a little bit of work that has to go into preparing a theme right now. So as I was answering that question, hopefully you had a chance to try to recreate this. I'll go ahead and do that now as well. So I want some text with an image right aligned. I want a bulleted list, and I want this gray box like so. So I'll go ahead and do that. So let me start here where I already have text and an image. Again, you can left or right align images or otherwise change their alignment. And then you'll notice when the image is selected, it has these little blue dots around the outer edge. That indicates that that's somewhere you can grab on to resize it. So I'm going to size it down. This paragraph block right here, I'm going to decide I would rather this be a list block. And so this is something that I didn't mention earlier, but is a really neat feature. Certain blocks can be transformed into other blocks. So if I go up to my little paragraph icon here, it will tell me change block type. If I click on this, here are the blocks that it is allowed to transform into, and I can choose list, and now it's a bulleted list. Everything in the paragraph is in just that first bullet point, but I can go ahead and press enter where I want to break it into additional bullet points, like so. Excuse me. You have the option of changing this from being a bulleted list to being a numbered list. So that's right up here, convert to ordered list. And now it's numbered instead of bulleted. And change it back. And then if I want this item to be a sub item underneath its parent just above it, I can go ahead and indent this item like so. And again, if I switch to a numbered list, it will do that as well and give me the sort of sub number right here. And then finally, the last thing in that example is I wanted a paragraph with the gray background and the drop quote or the drop cap. I'm going to go ahead and do that with this paragraph right here. I'll turn on over in the right hand side, I'll turn on the drop cap, and it does that to the first letter. It looks a little different than the example because of the way the styling is coded for this demo, but I can bring up the font size a little bit, and I'll go ahead and add a background color to make it in one of those nice gray boxes. Now this, exactly like this, I think we need to go back and look at the styling that we have for this drop cap, because this M is a lot larger than I expected it to be. Those are some of the quirks that theme developers are going to have to work out. But just in general, this gives you a lot of options for how you want to style content and bring attention and bring focus to something that's important for your users to see. So I'll go ahead and go to another example. Okay, so I've already built a photo gallery, but if you'd like to take a moment to do that as well, I'm going to go on to the next one since I already did a gallery. So this one features a few blocks that I've mentioned, but I'll go ahead and recreate it too. We have a cover image with text overlaid on top of it. We have the most recent posts that have been posted, and then we have a YouTube embed right here. So I'll go ahead and scroll down. I'll start with cover image. And since I added a cover image earlier, you'll notice it's under my most used right here. And select, start with this one. I is reading a book. Underneath, let's see what did we have? We had our latest posts. So I'll go ahead and add a block. And so I could search for it up here, latest posts. But I also happen to know that it is in the widgets section. So I can collapse my most used and go down to widgets, open that up, and select latest posts. We only have 2 posts published on this demo website. If there were more, you would see more, and you can arrange it in either a list view or a grid view. Again, with only 2 posts, it's not much of a grid, but there are a number of other options available on the right-hand side here as well. And then let's add that YouTube video. So if I add a block and I go down to embeds, and I choose my YouTube embed, you see it asks you for a YouTube URL. So I'm going to go to YouTube. And let's do something from the NC State Marching Band game show. Go ahead and select that URL, close it. And if I paste my URL right here and click embed, now my video is right here. And just like an image, I can add a caption or otherwise change the alignment uh, or things like that. So I believe those are all of the examples I wanted to run through. We do very much appreciate any feedback you can give for the course or for the workshop. It is about 3:30, which means we've hit our hour and a half. I'm going to stick around here for probably another 5 to 10 minutes. If you have any questions you realize you want to ask, and post in the Q&A document. Please feel free to keep experimenting, keep trying out Gutenberg. If you have something very specific you're looking to be able to do, I'm not necessarily going to be able to demo it for you, but I can certainly talk you through uh, where you would start and give you some tips. So otherwise, you're free to go. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for being patient through my little sound blip when I lost my internet access. Um, Please feel free to drop by our office hours this Friday or any Friday. And if you have any questions for our team, you can email oitdesign, all one word, at ncsu.edu, or uh, otherwise contact us as well. I'll be sending out a link to the slides and to the video, and a couple of other links to other resources this afternoon after we're done with the recording. So with that, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit, but please feel free to keep experimenting and let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, so I see Jen is answering a question, and I'm going to go ahead and say out loud what she's writing as well. So there's a question about how to how to get Gutenberg and try it out some more. So we do have this campus sandbox that you can play in and get to know Gutenberg. I'll go ahead and bring that slide up again, present. So that's at oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg. You can create a site and log in and make any changes that you want and save them and keep experimenting with it. If you want to try it on your own site, Jen is letting you know, and I'll just reiterate here. There is a plugin that you can add that will give you the option of editing content in either the classic editor or the Gutenberg editor. And then if you're in a multi-site environment, it can be installed on just one site or across the entire multi-site network. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out to whoever your web administrators are or your web developers who are supporting you. Or if you are one of the administrators, the Gutenberg plugin is available in the regular WordPress plugin repository. You can just search for Gutenberg and it will come up. All right, well, I don't see anybody else typing anything, and I see a couple of people leaving the Q&A document, so I'm going to assume everybody's feeling good, or at least doesn't have any questions right now. Again, I'll be sending out the link to the slides in the video, and if you have any questions beyond that, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So thank you all very much for sharing part of your afternoon with us.